On average, the pace of our day-to-day lives has sped up dramatically over the past 2 decades. Nowadays, we pretty much always have access to whatever we want when we want it. Restaurant quality meals straight to our doors, any kind of entertainment to suit our mood, and endless sources to aid in research and studies. Whatever it is, we can most likely get it from the click of a mouse or the touch of a screen. Now, whether this is a good or bad thing, I'm not here to say. Life is all about the give and take, so come to no conclusion on that one. What I am here to talk about is a specific aspect in story-driven video games that I feel is falling more and more by the wayside as there are countless other options also vying for our attention. But nevertheless, this aspect remains very important in making sure something is memorable and leaves a lasting impact, and that aspect is quiet time. Now, what exactly is quiet time? To put it simply, it's the rise and fall between the action. The connecting tissue that helps build or sell tension, or that breath of air that allows you a chance to reflect on and savor the events that just transpired, while making you hungry for more. These periods also don't necessarily have to be quiet like the name implies. The main point is usually to provide contrast, so there is some variation in what these moments end up looking and sounding like in practice. Half-Life 1 and 2 are often brought up as examples for this concept, as their use of puzzles offer a good break in the action, letting you take in more of the world and its details as you figure them out. This is a fine enough example, but it never really struck a chord with me, especially when it comes to FPSs, because in my eyes, Halo shines much brighter in this regard. To illustrate, the original Combat Evolved starts off on a bombastic note with its first mission, Pillar of Autumn. You, John Halo, are woken from cryo sleep and almost immediately have to clock in and start painting the surrounding area of tight corridors with alien blood, while fighting alongside fellow Marines as you carve a path towards the ship's life pods and flee the Covenant assault.
Punch it.
Ah, sir!
This as an opening level is pretty cool, but doesn't quite reach the level of, oh, this shit fucks. That's reserved for the start of the next mission, Halo, where you crash land on one of the Halo rings.
I'm losing her! Right for impact!
And the reason this mission goes so hard is because you're introduced to this brand new alien world all by your lonesome. A few Marines could have easily survived the crash with you, but Bungie said nah, making the right call, leaving you alone to soak in the scenery and Martin O'Donnell's epic music uninterrupted and at your own pace. The presentation of the sequence standing on its own is great, but its greatest strength lies in allowing both the previous and following action to stand out even more as you're given a chance to sit back and appreciate it. This approach is also why I think people have such fond memories of OG Halo. Sure, the gameplay and sandbox that Bungie crafted stands the test of time. That's been pretty evident in the endless discussion we've seen regarding multiplayer since the release of the Master Chief Collection and Halo Infinite. But if it wasn't for these moments and pacing that gives the player the opportunity to soak in the more minor aspects of the world, I feel the series would have never been as successful as it ended up being. I think this is something Bungie even realized to a certain extent, because aside from their efforts to gather a deal earlier than Microsoft, ODST was taken in a slightly more grounded direction with its gameplay, with a larger focus on what happens in between the firefights. These changes in the formula mainly revolve around who you play as. No longer are you a demigod of a Spartan. This time around, you're a highly trained but relatively normal human dubbed the Rookie, who rather than trying to save the world is just trying to unfuck his shitty situation of being stranded alone far behind enemy lines. This setup might seem kind of boring for a Halo game, but the act of scouring the cold, dark, and wet streets in New Mombasa for clues is kept engaging because of how beautifully it sets and sells that tone of isolation. Aside of the conclusion of the game, the only dialogue you hear as a Rookie comes from enemies and the mysteries you're piecing together. Additionally, the ambient sounds of the environment and music fit this vibe perfectly. The pitter-patter of rain falling, kiosks coming to life as you walk by, sirens of abandoned cars going off, all this backed by a smooth set of ivory and brass instruments. It turns that feeling of isolation to something almost otherworldly.
Please, rise.
This feeling and tone is further enhanced by the flashback sequences where you play as the other members of the Rookie squad. These parts in terms of gameplay are pretty standard when it comes to FPS affairs, but with them being sandwiched between the quiet and lonely noir sections, they're able to invoke a more grandiose feeling. Like going from wandering the dimly lit streets as a lone wolf who is barely scraping by, to the top of a skyscraper fighting off wave after wave of brutes with your squad mates, all accompanied by a sick guitar riff playing in the background. This juxtaposition is really what lets the action nail home that sense of camaraderie. It makes everything seem so much more triumphant and badass than it would otherwise be able to. Now for the next game I want to talk about, and that's Red Dead Redemption 2. At face value, Red Dead 2's quiet time seems pretty basic compared to the strategic and methodical pacing of a Halo. It follows the typical open world handbook, having lots of downtime due to traveling and playing it safe with what you do in between the story. For most games in this genre, it means Hour 8 is going to look and feel almost exactly the same as Hour 100. Sadly, Red Dead 2 also falls victim to this fate in regards to its gameplay, because it's pretty much the same from start to finish, but it does avoid becoming a pointless slog and stays compelling throughout. This is in large part thanks to who the player character is and how well they are realized. Arthur Morgan is the lens in which we experience the main story through. I put it like this instead of saying something like who you play as, not to be fancy, but because who Arthur is and how he reacts to things is the important part, as even outside of the story events or missions, it's very clearly communicated through his body language as well as his remarks on almost everything you encounter while controlling him, that he's someone who's already been shaped by a lifetime full of experiences.
Then turtle bites is bad too. They call them snapping for a reason.
Yeah, I've been known to snap too. So, how about we keep it down?
This does wonders in enhancing the more mundane activities like fishing,
You, sir, are a fish.
hunting,
Just hold on there, girl.
talking with random townsfolk,
Oh, you look thirsty. I ain't thirsty, but I could crack some sense into you, sure.
and brushing your horse.
Let's get you looking good.
Because not only is the game reacting to your input in a couple of different ways, making it actually enjoyable to do the otherwise boring shit, you're also getting a little more insight on Arthur's personality and who he really is. His notebook also accomplishes this, and sometimes even better, as his sketches of animals and landmarks he's seen throughout his travels shed light on the more creative and thoughtful side that's buried beneath his hardened cowboy bravado. All of this goes a long way in transforming that needless filler and useless busy work from other games into something that's worthwhile and key to the overall experience, as it deepens your connection to the world and its narrative, since it's more like living out the life of a person rather than just playing as a character. This kind of immersion also grants many more minor touches the ability to stick with you and make a bigger impression. The perfect crystallization of this is how Arthur reacts to his horse catching a bullet towards the end of the game. The scene is totally missable if your horse isn't bonded with you, meaning even at one of the most critical moments in the story, the game is still reacting to whether or not you're a complete psycho. And if you aren't, it's cashing in on that investment of those countless hours, carrots, brushes, and
Yeah, that's my girl.
that both you and Arthur have given the horse. Moving on from one depressing note to another, this probably won't come as a surprise, but The Last of Us 2 has some of the most expert uses of quiet time I've seen yet. Takes bits and pieces from about everything I mentioned previously and more. We got Half-Life-esque puzzles that make you look around the environment, a similar cadence of combat to sightseeing from Halo, as well as the player characters reacting to almost everything you do, resembling that of Red Dead 2.
That's pretty smart, Ellie.
But the part I want to focus in on in the spotlight is how it shows up during the gameplay in and around combat. To start, the foundation and core loop of combat is built around the catch and release of tension. Anyone who's already familiar with the game will know exactly what I'm talking about. But for everyone else who isn't, the combat encounters basically boil down to a game of manhunt, where the role of who's it is constantly being tossed back and forth between you and the enemies. Everything will go from being calm, cool, and collected as you're exploring an area, grabbing supplies, setting traps, and picking off loners, to fucked up and panicked in the matter of a split second as you botch a shot with your bow or you're caught without cover. Once this happens, you go from playing the hunter to playing the prey. While filling this role, it doesn't mean you're forced to run away, though that's often a valid option. During this conflict, you usually have lots of tools to fight back. Some of these tools come in the forms of melee weapons, homemade explosives, and the almighty power of the gun. What actually discourages you in taking the honest fight and makes it tough is the many lengths that Naughty Dog took in making the AI seem real and believable. The amount of actions they can take is honestly pretty wild, same with the amount of variations to those actions. Just to name a few, they'll shout out for their allies to flank you,
Get around her!
call out to their comrades who you've killed by name.
Skira! She's fucking dead!
They'll also check out the location of where you shot or threw something from rather than instantly detecting you.
Think it came from that direction!
And they'll even hear you craft items or reload your gun if you're nearby on the higher difficulties.
Huh? What the fuck?
All of this not only presents the enemies as a fun challenge to interact with and overcome, but it also goes the distance in helping to frame, build, and contextualize the tension of going from that silent position of power to a desperate struggle for survival. Speaking of desperation, the music and sound design is another intrinsic factor in driving home and reinforcing that feeling, as every moment that is fated to devolve into a hellish mix of blood, screams, and gunshots is supported by the rhythmic use of percussion, droning synths, and discordant strings, provided by composer Mac Quayle. Likewise, outside of combat, Gustavo Santaolalla's iconic work with his guitar and banjo chords help instill that somber, yet hopeful feeling that goes along perfectly with the natural beauty that is reclaiming the world bit by bit. To summarize, The Last of Us 2's gameplay is probably the most perfect dichotomy as I think you can get, especially the contrast between the tense moments where you're fighting for your life and the calmer times where survival isn't at the front of mind and you can plot your next move or take in the sights. There's a lot more I could jerk off this game about, as well as the others I've mentioned previously, just on this topic on its own, but in the effort to keep this video somewhat brief, I'll save that for another time. With that said, I hope this video mostly made sense, and at the very least inspires you to stop for a second and smell the roses along the way next time you're playing one of your favorite games.